Welcome to Religion in the American Experience, a podcast that explores how religion has shaped America and how America has shaped religion, which can help us as we wrestle with complex questions of American governance and purpose in the 21st century. Here's your host, Chris Stevenson.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Religion in the American Experience. Today, we're going to explore religion's influence on the life, times, and music of Paul David Hewson, also known as Bono, founding member and lead singer of the band U2. While he is from Dublin, Ireland, U2 has been, and for many still is, a beloved and influential band in the United States. We believe, as with every episode, that understanding this particular thread of America's religious fabric will make each of us more effective stewards of religion's role in the American experiment in self-government. Chad Seals has joined us. Thank you, Chad, for sharing with us both your time and knowledge.
And thanks, Chris, for inviting me to participate in the podcast.
Chad Seals is Associate Professor of Religious Studies and holder designate of the Brian F. Bolton Distinguished Professorship in Secular Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. He earned a PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. His research addresses the cultural relationship between religion and secularism in American life. He is the editor of the Routledge Handbook of Religion and American Culture and the author of Religion Around Bono, Evangelical Enchantment and Neoliberal Capitalism, and The Secular Spectacle, Performing Religion in a Southern Town. Chad has also published articles and book chapters on religious comparison, religion and food, industrial religion, corporate chaplaincy, religion and film, and secularism and secularization in the United States. Again, thank you, Chad. Bono grew up in Ireland during the Troubles, the son of a Roman Catholic father and an Anglican mother. Chad, what can you tell us about religion's role in his formation during those years in his parents' home?
Sure. The key takeaway that Bono had from that experience was that religion, for him, gets in the way of love, as he saw with his parents. And so he, at a very early age, had a built-in mistrust for organized religion. And later on, as he developed his thinking, would say that religion gets in the way of experiencing God. So a lot of his theology and his understandings of religion come from what he saw in his experience with his mother. He also loses his mother pretty young in life, which happens. He loses his mother a couple years very close to his conversion to Christianity. So his main experience from the Troubles is that the political divides that happen between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland, when he saw his parents' relationship as something that transcended those politics. So for him, true love is equal to the experience of true religion, and that transcends earthly politics.
So his parents, were they active in their faith or not? Do you know? Do we know?
As far as I understand, and just as a caveat, since Bono is a celebrity, my reporting on what he thinks about religion is through, secondary, what commentary, his own statements also, but there's a whole genre of U2 studies, and there's lots and lots. When I was developing the project, just tons of literature around who Bono is and what he thinks. And Bono is also not shy for speaking up for himself. So my understanding is that his parents didn't have the religious seriousness that contributed to the political divides in Ireland, in the sense that they didn't take what was told to them that a Catholic should not marry a Protestant as a legitimate religious directive, but took it upon themselves to find their own spirituality and their own spiritual path and to break out of those denominational/organizational divides.
Okay. Do you know if Bono went to church with his mom or dad growing up? Do we know that?
I don't know how much he entered a church. I think, if I recall, he did make it into a service, but honestly, I don't remember exactly if that is part of the record.
Okay.
I don't think his parents were church-going folk, as far as I understand it. So he wasn't at Mass weekly,
right?
As I understand it.
Okay, that's sort of what I got from the book as well. So Chad, you write that he, quote, rejected religion in favor of evangelicalism a much more radical form of Protestantism than the Anglican state church, close quote. Can you fill in the details here? In the religious history of Ireland, what is modern evangelicalism?
Yeah, the interesting thing about Ireland is evangelicalism is a super small slice of the religious pie. And so by coincidence or cosmic alignment, Bono finds his way into evangelicalism in a way that if he lived in different parts of Ireland may not have, but because he was in the suburban world of Dublin, he actually ends up going to a Mount Temple Comprehensive School in Dublin, which is this experiential form of evangelical Christianity. And just to define evangelical Christianity, scholars often refer to it as religion of the heart. So, for example, when George W. Bush was running for president, he spoke the language of evangelicals by saying, "In my heart of hearts," he would use that phrase when he was campaigning, and half the country would understand what that means. By that, I mean the United States, as we know, has a much stronger evangelical tradition than in Ireland.
Right.
So Bono basically, if you track U2 and their connection between Ireland and America, Bono says many times over that we all live in America. So the band makes it as a huge pop band, like rock and roll band, by coming to the United States. And so they're this Irish band from the United States. But what Bono does is fuse the Irish national identity with this brand of evangelicalism that, again, was such a small piece of Irish history, but a huge piece of American history. And evangelicalism is literally his bridge in terms of the aesthetics, the motion, the experience of the concerts is through and through evangelical. And so his historical conversion is he experienced a Christian conversion in 1976 when he was at Mount Temple. And it was 3 of the band members were very strong into that. So it was The Edge and Larry Mullen Jr., the drummer. Adam Clayton, the bassist, was always, as far as I understand, on the outskirts of that and never experienced the same religious conversion. But the things to highlight about evangelicalism are its emphasis. It's at its roots, it's anarchist. And if you track the band's history, Bono was into punk and this anarchism. And there was also, around the same time period in the 70s in California in the United States, there was a sort of outburst of anarchist evangelicalism in terms of music. T-Bone Burnett, there was apocalyptic films that were coming out with that. And Bono absorbed a lot of that and brought it into U2 as an aesthetic. You can hear it and the music, especially on Rattle and Hum and Bullet the Blue Sky. And these were themes that the 70s versions of evangelicalism on a global scale, Ireland was that. He just got in the one line that connected him to this American strand of evangelicalism. And it's anarchist in the sense of it's inherently, in many ways, one of the more radical forms of Protestantism, and that it is constantly dissolving organizational forms and resisting. So it's constantly protesting hierarchy and constantly flattening it. The irony is in American evangelicalism is that radical form of democratic formation that was anarchist and egalitarian gives way to a rise of aspirational middle-class status that produces huge denominations like the Southern Baptist Convention. So that I can get into that if that's of interest as well. But in summary, what Bono experienced at Mount Temple matched up with American evangelicalism as a religion of the heart, experiential piety, where you're experiencing God directly and not through a priest or an institution or a pastor.
Right.
And that's the key thing. And then biblical scripture is also important, but Bono doesn't bring that into the band U2, but is definitely interested in it on his own on the side. The other 2 things to highlight at Mount Temple were they had prayer meetings that were often spontaneous, and they had praise and worship. So really what Bono was experiencing in 1976 was something American evangelicals are readily familiar with.
Right. How did he end up there at that school? Do you know?
I don't know the story of how he ended up there, other than, I don't know. There's probably someone who would have a deeper dive in U2 studies could say. I don't know if his parents got him there. I mean, it was 2 years after he lost his mother. So the story of the loss of the mother was when his mom's father passed away. She collapsed at the funeral, and 4 days later died. And so Bono credits talks about all of his creative energy coming from the loss of his mother. And that's something that drives him his entire career, is trying to like connect with her, find her, and it's expressed through the music. And evangelicalism becomes, as the religion of the heart, there's that loss of mother and the coupling with the experiential piety part of seeking, constantly trying to find God and experience God. But also there's a lot of anger and rage in Bono's lyrics, which is also deep in evangelicalism as well, of being what Bono latches on to evangelicalism is the strand that's very confrontational with God, questioning God's justice, but also like pushing through to find faith and the hope of God's healing. And so you see it really in the Rabble and Hum piece as a lot too, like the wrestling with God as Jacob wrestled with the angel. So Bono's musical career is very much tied into those early days. It's the working out of those challenges that he had early on in life.
Okay. All right. Well, helpful. Chad, you also explain his religion in your book in this way, quote, Bono talks like an evangelical, but never as an evangelical, close quote. What do you mean here?
He's unlike evangelical ministers or pastors. For example, I would say Bono is to the expansion of market economy into Africa as Billy Graham was to the Cold War. But the difference would be Billy Graham was a confessional evangelical. Like everyone knew he was a Baptist minister. He identified as a minister. He spoke as a minister. He famously dressed as a minister when he's interviewing with Woody Allen. It's this famous interaction. But Bono speaks to evangelicals and among evangelicals, but will never say, like, I am an evangelical like spokesperson in the way Billy Graham was. So he admires Billy Graham. He's constantly in conversation with Billy Graham. This also matches up to he's also in conversation with Eugene Peterson, who's one of the translators of New Testament texts into vernacular in a more evangelical style. So Bono circulates among evangelicals, but part of his neoliberal brand is to speak and circulate without actually being that thing. So in the same way as his politics, when he was advocating for debt relief in Africa, he would circulate among Republicans and Democrats, but again, try to transcend the particularity of any of those political parties. And the same thing is happening with evangelicalism. He's circulating among evangelicals, but he's saying he's transcending any particular evangelical doctrinal definition of who they are, or an allegiance, or identifying with any particular denomination. So he's very much, in that sense, really bringing out if there is an essence to evangelicalism, it is this kind of anarchist tendency to say, I'm not in your group, but I'm going to speak to your group. Well, the irony historically is that the churches that what Bono did was stand outside the church as in a prophetic way and talk to evangelicals and talk to Christianity. But many of those churches later on adapted their praise and worship styles on U2 concerts. So the very thing he was prophesying towards and saying he's outside of, that whole group really incorporates his very style of worship as secular in the sense of literally meaning just outside the church. So
is there a strong thread between Bono's outside the church advocacy, musical worship, I guess, or music and praise bands in evangelical churches?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of praise bands, they reproduce U2's style of music in praise and worship songs.
Really? It's fascinating.
Yeah. And they do that. And then the other phenomenon that happens later is that the Episcopal churches they created a Eucharist, where they literally play YouTube music. So what a lot of evangelical non-denominational churches do is they create a worship style that is modeled directly on YouTube concerts, but they create their own music. So it's not YouTube music exactly. And Episcopal churches later take the YouTube music itself and create a whole liturgy around it and call it Eutychus.
I have a question about Eutychus later, so let me hold on that. But let me go back quickly before we move to the next question. You mentioned he talked a lot, communicated with, Billy Graham.
Yeah, but yeah.
What do you know about that? Any details?
He later on, he was an admirer of Billy Graham, and he later on, I read he did interviews with Billy Graham's son, with Franklin Graham. But again, he was circulating among evangelicalism. My sense is what he admired about Graham was Graham's ability to speak to a large audience and to turn a stadium into a worship service. Graham also pioneered a lot of multimedia and revivals. So one of the things from American religious history it's important to understand is that Bono stands in a tradition of American revivalism that goes back to Charles Finney in the 1830s in upstate New York. And Finney famously said in the Second Great Awakening that a revival is not a miracle. And so it was this turn away from the early days of Jonathan Edwards as a revivalist who had a more stronger version of Calvinism where he believed the revival is all of God's work and all we can do as humans is show up to church when we can, and then God may or may not have a revival. Finney, on the other hand, translated the form of the revivalist into a farmer in the sense that a farmer can't make the sunshine or the rain fall from the sky, but they can have techniques of farming in which they sow the crops in rows. And so he believed that the revivalist was like a farmer in that way, is that God's ultimately the one who converts souls, but the revivalist, like the farmer, can use techniques to plant seeds and harvest them in ways that knowing the conditions that will work. And so Finney famously invented techniques called the anxious bench, where we'd have people, sit up front if they're contemplating their salvation at a revival. And Bono uses in his concerts similar revival techniques, even though, again, he's not speaking as an evangelical. But rather than asking people to convert to Christianity, he's asking people to convert to a lot of the global philanthropic missions that he promotes, including sponsorship of promoting the United Nations human rights. And he'll ask people in concerts to, donate to buy Red Campaign. I'm happy to speak about that as well. So the concert is not his work in global philanthropy. And it's not philanthropy. That's the thing. He says it's not. I want to clarify. I'm describing it as part of a broader global philanthropic movement, but he says it's not philanthropy at all. He's asking consumers to basically make purchases that would help people, in this case, help Africans. Right. So those revival techniques are in that strand.
Okay. So before we move into religion's role in his music more, I want to ask you this. Can you describe his religious practices and life?
My sense of what I know about Bono and U2, and again, he's a celebrity, so I won't say I know what he does every day in life, but his expression of religion, I think, is through cultural, aesthetic, artistic. So it's through music, it's through lyrics. The early days of U2, the lyrics are explicit. He's quoting scriptures. There's songs with the Psalms in it. The Edge too. It's important to include the Edge here as well because he is also part of the early evangelical group, and he models a lot of the chords for U2 on sacred music and Christian traditions, particularly Bach, for example. So a lot of the music itself is designed to be a religious experience. So I think on an everyday level, Bono that's what I mean when I say he's secularizing evangelicalism by taking it out of the church. And evangelicals themselves secularize religion by taking it out of organized churches like the Anglican Church and Catholicism. So they're moving, and what evangelicals do is move religion closer and closer to culture, and Bono just takes it literally one step further by putting it in a band that you can listen to the music and you can be confessionally evangelical or not, but you're still sharing the power of evangelical revival, and again, evangelicalism is based on revival traditions that are in Western Europe and then come over to the United States, but they're also global in the Caribbean. But these revivals are reoccurring, and you think of rock concerts, we have in pop culture these structural models that resemble religious forms. And so culture itself becomes a form of expressing and creating and performing religion. So Bono's everyday, I think his everyday religious experience says, he also though does read scripture, because I know in his conversations with Eugene Peterson, it's clear he's reading scripture. So I think on a more private level, he's doing what evangelicals typically would do, like prayer, reading scripture, reading the Bible. But on a public persona level, all of his religious expression is to be for the consumer, whether confessional or not, through the music and he also has artistic endeavors, writing projects and art outside of U2 itself. And I think that's part of his religious creativity as well.
Yeah. How does he view other faiths? Does he view Christianity as, the one right faith?
No, he views it as right for him in the sense that, but he doesn't think there's any organized religion is the right religion. So he's about experiencing in a cosmic sense whatever's behind the universe. And for him, it's God. So he's naming it in his experience as God. But he doesn't incorporate like world religions into his musical expressions. I mean, they do take on themes. The curious thing too is he's definitely drawn to African American music, and he's drawn to Africa, but he doesn't include African music in U2. He just says it doesn't work for them. Paul Simon, on the other hand, famously went to South Africa and worked with South African musicians and did incorporate those forms of musicality into his own performances. So there is a bit of distancing, and the project I wrote for the book is that religion that goes around Bono to talk about the ways that American religious history with race and blackface minstrelsy and constructions of images in Africa is a religion that circulates around Bono in ways that I don't know if he sees clearly sometimes, I don't know, but it's definitely there in the production of, but in terms of his relationship with other religions, he thinks that whatever, and again, I'm saying what he thinks, but it appears to be that any religion that brings people closer to the experiencing divine reality, whatever that may be, or cosmic reality of the sacred, he's okay with. So in that sense, he's not holding up. That's why to clarify with the speaking to evangelicals but not an evangelical, one of the major distinctions is he's not saying there's a true or false form of religion in any earthly organized form. Okay. So he may say there's true or false religious experience, but that can manifest itself in any ways in human socialization with religion itself.
So there are multiple ways to God, I guess, is what he would say.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a more straightforward way to say it.
Yeah. Okay.
But he would, I think, even hedge by saying he knows who God is in a doctrinal, theological sense. So it's not a Protestant sort of like 1893 Chicago World's Parliament of Religions idea. It's not as if all these religions are leading to a form of Protestantism. They're leading to more of to say it more bluntly, like his form of religion leads to a form of global consumerism. And that's how you experience being human, helping others, and having like divine intervention, literally.
Okay. You wrote, and it matches some of what you just said, that he tells his fans during concerts that they are at church and this musical performance they're witnessing or experiencing is worship, right?
He says that out loud. And it's more of revealing an open secret in the sense that some fans might be surprised to hear that. And other fans would say, yes, we've known this all along because we've read his lyrics and we've read what he says about scripture. So it's an open secret that Bono, again, experiences evangelicalism So he's almost telling everyone there, like, if you like the music, if you like the show, guess what? You're at church. So
Yeah.
it's a kind of
Yeah.
surprise moment that he's saying for us as a band, other than again Adam Clayton, who's always kind of remained on the periphery of this religious notion of U2, but still is part of their family. Is that's what Bono is saying to them, that
Yeah.
guess what? You're
Okay.
at church.
Okay, let's see. You explain that many U2 fans, I'm quoting here, many U2 fans are spiritual seekers who look to Bono and U2 for personal inspiration. They are consumers of a spiritual brand of popular culture, close quote. What is the significance of this and how has it played out, including, as you already brought up, the Eutychurist phenomenon?
Yeah, so to get to the Eutychurist phenomenon is to back up for a second and
Yeah.
explain that Bono created with the Red Campaign, which still is around, but the Red Campaign takes consumer objects like a Starbucks tumbler or a Gucci bag or Armani watch, and it would brand it as red. And all it does is if you buy a red product, then a portion of those proceeds, and again, this was very opaque and no one knows exactly what portion, but would go towards causes in Africa like malaria nets or antiretroviral drugs. And in the early days of the Red Campaign, they even had a values calculator. So you could put in the number of watches you purchased and you could get, the calculator would spit out the number of lives, African lives saved. So it was very, very much this one-to-one correlation. If you buy this product, you save someone's life. So that consumer brand of revivalism was what was circulating in popular culture. And so what YouTube,
When
what
did that
Bono,
begin? When did the Red Campaign begin?
it begins, he launches it on the Oprah show. I don't have the exact date in front of me. I do write
Is
about it in the book, but
it 2000s? Sometime in
yeah, so
2000s?
exactly.
Okay.
It's early. Yeah, I think it's mid 2000.
Okay,
I'd
good
have to go
enough.
back and check.
No, that's good. Mid
Yeah,
2000s.
it's been,
Not in the 90s, not in
because
the
he
80s.
starts it comes on the heels of the Jubilee movement. So
Right.
he's big with the Drop the Debt campaign in 2000 and then soon after becomes the Red Campaign, and I
Okay,
can't believe it's been
good.
that long now, but yeah, I still think it's not as popular as it was. But one of the things that's fascinating with the Red Campaign is they had a slogan that don't just be a good Samaritan, be a good looking Samaritan. So that consumerism
Never
is
heard that. Okay.
yeah, consumerism is the way, if you're going to buy products anyway, and like there's nothing wrong with fashion, nothing wrong with style. So it's a way of taking a particular ethos of helping someone else. And the goal that Bono was involved in is ending global poverty and making that into a consumer campaign. And I say all this stuff to lead up to the Eutychurist
Yeah.
because it becomes a ritual form of expressing social justice in a way that's outside of religious boundaries, again, organizations, denominations. The other thing to mention really quickly is the Red Campaign was the color red was intended as the inverse of the Communist Manifesto. So it was, and in the Soviet Union, they created Red Religion. There's the book that speaks to that exactly. No, I can't remember the title of the second. But so Bono intentionally makes this campaign basically a form of consumer-driven capitalism that's going to end global poverty. So the Eutychurist piece comes out of it as, so this version of social justice as a consumer practice has been circulating in U2 concerts. It's now got product branding. And then at the end of the kind of Red Campaign, the Episcopal Church starts taking what was in U2 concerts and literally moving them back into their church services. And not every church service, but they would have an occasional, and they would call it Eutychurist. And they would just, the service would be quite similar to a U2 concert in the sense that they literally would listen to record. They would either have recordings of U2 and play it in the service, or they'd have a band themselves play the U2's music. And then they would, instead of donating money to the church as an offering, you would, just in U2 concerts, you would give money to causes in Africa. So it was designed. It was designed around a social justice mission, but that social justice mission was now being articulated by the U2 brand and not by a priest or a biblical principle.
Right. Did the Episcopal Church during the Eucharist services actually have the Eucharist? I mean, did they go through with?
I believe they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they had the Eucharist as well. Yeah. There's
Yeah.
news reports on it when it came out, and yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I'll have to look into that. You mentioned this. I want to ask you about it. Bono professed a secular Christian spiritual calling to end poverty. So, to me, that tells a lot about Bono and his religion. That he felt a spiritual calling to do this. What else? When did he express that? Was he this later in life or early in life? And what else does this tell us about Bono's religion, in your opinion?
Yeah, the spiritual quest to end poverty sort of starts early on in U2's journey because they signed with Island Records, and Island Records produces Bob Marley. So Island was producing basically like social justice. So U2 latches on or joins what appears to be like kind of a global social justice brand. That's always been U2's brand. And so the poverty piece comes out of their, they became part of they launched globally for the, what is the big USAID concert they did in England. But that was his,
Right.
that was his entry into the poverty in Africa. And then he goes and visits Africa personally, and it follows a kind of missionary tale in the sense of missionaries going to a country, seeing firsthand what's happening. And it was a conversion experience for him in the sense of he wanted to do something about it and he wanted to end poverty. And I think to Bono's credit is he has, whatever he says, he has tried to make into a reality. So he has wanted to, and the critique that I offer in the book is that the way he's working to end poverty in Africa is using the same colonial systems that have intervened in the continent over hundreds of years. So it's not allowing Africans to solve African problems. And that was a lot of the criticism that African economists have put back to U2. But Bono partners with Jeffrey Sachs, the Harvard economist. He also works with the Bill Gates and the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation. So you think of these huge corporations and these huge economic models that they see debt in Africa as a problem that they don't. By contrast, the United States has a lot more debt than Africa ever had, like just sheer debt. And one of the things that I finished up the book about religion around Bono is that the very first actually red campaign product was an American Express credit card. So consumers are accumulating debt to help others that they see in need. So it's taking an evangelical missionary drive to help someone else, which is a wonderful human instinct, but it's translating that human drive to help someone else into the language of a form of capitalism that's intervening into a continent using economic models that allow corporations to be multinational global corporations to be the mediators of this change. And I point out that Dr. King, for example, is someone that Bono celebrates. They has a song dedicated. In every U2 concert that I know of, they sing "In the Name of Love" and honor Dr. King. But Bono never once mentions that Dr. King was a Christian socialist. So he mentions racial integration, but from a historian's perspective, it's pretty conscious. America has done this, Bono has done this, is to neglect Dr. King's economic critique as part of his theology. Those two things were inseparable from him. But on the eve of his assassination, he's working with sanitation workers in an organized strike to promote labor unions. So there's a whole history of Christian critique against not being anti-capitalist, but being critical of the worst parts of capitalism.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Very interesting. Don't think I ever thought along these lines as I listened to Bono.
Yeah, there's a lot
And
going
U2.
on there.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. So here at the end, Chad, as we conclude, do you want to share any further lessons or takeaways from Bono and Religion, either in terms of important historical transformations you have noticed or in terms of helping us better understand our present moment in the American narrative?
Yeah, I think just as I was just saying before with the different economic alternatives, is just thinking of ourselves as not just consumers is something I think Bono has shown the power to organize people outside of religious congregations, churches, denominations, structures, and that the consumer is a very powerful cultural form in which we, whether it's in the United States or England, in the UK or in Ireland, that's a very powerful form of creating religion and popular culture. But to also think of who's excluded from that role. So when consumers look to go help other people in need, whether it's people experiencing poverty in Africa or whether it's people experiencing homelessness in urban areas in the United States and rural areas too, what does it mean when they aren't included as equals in that form of cultural production? So how does that produce someone else as different, as distant? And that's one thing I think to keep in mind in American religious history, that American religious history includes all kinds of forms of distancing through racial differences, like blackface minstrelsy, enslavement, in which everyone is together in the same place, but people are given different rights. They're given different forms of citizenship, if at all. And just to think of how religious forms of helping the other, if they maintain in a sense of that historical version of distancing others as not included in the group that's helping, what does that do for the problem that's being addressed? And so that's just to say that each religious expression that happens in a different historical epoch will have an alternative option to it that will produce a form of criticism, critique, and evangelicalism is a powerful form of religious criticism. And so for every religious criticism generated, there'll be another one that comes with it. So I think for those who love U2's music, for evangelicals themselves who are confessional evangelicals, and then also for just the consumer that wants to do good in the world, whether it's through red products or whether it's through, there's Tom's shoes, there's all kinds of versions of consumerism that's also a form of philanthropy. Just thinking through, just knowing that religious history will help understand the limits of those economic models.
Fascinating. Super helpful insights, Chad. I appreciate that. We have been speaking with Chad Seals, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Texas at Austin, and author of Religion Around Bono, Evangelical Enchantment, and Neoliberal Capitalism. Chad, thanks so much for giving us of your time and understanding this morning. This was a superb episode as we explore, which I've never really done, Bono and his religion and the religion around him. As you say, there's lots of stuff going on here for us to think about. I do believe that each of us is now better equipped to be more effective stewards of religion's role in perpetuating the American experiment and self-government. Thank you, Chad.
Well, thanks, Chris. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Religion in the American Experience is produced by the private, digital-first National Museum of American Religion. Scholarly support is provided by Dr. Lauren Turek and audio and video assistance by Dr. Randall Stevens. The music was composed by Evan Chamberlain.